So we're ready to start. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everybody. Welcome to this third day of the WLA-EL Security Webinar Week. Let me start with some technical reminders. All attendees are in listen-only mode. You're all welcome to ask any questions you may have via the GoToWebinar chat that you can find on the upper part of the screen right side. We will do our best to address all the questions, and in any case, we remain at your disposal for any doubts you might have afterwards. You can write us at security@world-lotteries.org. The recording of the webinar will be made available to EL and WLA members on our website after the event. Auditors will find the video on the WLA website as well under the security section. So today I have the honor and the pleasure of opening the webinar for the launch of the new WLA security control standard, the WLA-SCS. This year, the standard celebrates the 20th anniversary, so we couldn't celebrate better than by launching the 2020 version. Let me briefly introduce myself. I'm Valeria Serpentini, and I work for the WLA since March 2018. In the last year, I had the pleasure to coordinate the work of the Security and Risk Management Committee, getting to know a group of people who, believe me, is dedicating a lot of time and valuable expertise for the improvement of the security standard and the program as a whole. Today, we will hear from three of them about the new standard and the new path of the WLA security program. But there are other 17 members who participated in this update from Asia to Europe, Latin America, North America, and Africa. So let me now introduce you the SRMC members we have here today with us. David Boda, Head of Information Security at Camelot UK, will explain you better the changes to the controls, to the standard. Anton Stiglitz, Senior Corporate Director of IT Governance at Lotto Quebec in Canada and Vice Chair of the SRMC Technical Working Group, will give you more insight on the updates, on all the updates of the security program. And last but certainly not least, I would like to give the floor to Dato Lawrence Lim, CEO of Magnum Corporation in Malaysia and Chair of the Security and Risk Management Committee. Dato Lawrence, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Valeria. And good morning to all of you in the Americas. Good afternoon to those of you in Europe, and good evening for those from the Asia Pacific region. Today is the 7th of October, 2020, and today is the official launch of WLA-SCS 2020. Today we're going to launch the standard itself, WLA-SCS 2020, the framework 2020, and the guide to certification. All three of these have been approved by the WLA General Assembly by way of a write-in vote, which was concluded on last Friday, the 2nd of October. So today, you are the ones who have the privilege, I guess, of hearing this for the first time. And this is the official launch and the first one since the approval by the General Assembly. First of all, let me just say this, that, can I have the slide, please? Long journey. Okay. First of all, I'd like to thank all the voluntary work that's been provided by the SRMC members. I think it's with great pride that we say that this entire series of work has been done by members of WLA and the member lottery members of WLA. There were no outside professional consultants or anyone else involved in the preparation of this set of work. So it is with great pride that we say this. And of course, this was done, through a series of meetings, discussions, proposals over the last 3 years. And if you remember, the deadline was set for this launch and supposedly to be at the WLS in Vancouver. But because of the pandemic, I think that's now been postponed, but we are still holding on to this launch date. And we have actually successfully completed the work, and it is really, as I said again, the work of the SRMC members whose profiles you can find in the WLA website. And okay, so this is a fantastic achievement. Of course, remembering as well that, you know, for the last 6 months, they've all been working through a pandemic, and actually none of them have actually met physically. They've all done this virtually, and yet the work was actually completed on time. So fantastic, thank you very much. So I'd like to go on the journey itself, and so the journey for WLA-SCS 2020 started in 2017, and that was straight after the last standard, which was WLA-SCS 2016. And so there was a thought about evolving the standards to develop a more solid base for the next generation of WLA security programs. The real change came about at a meeting in February 2019 at the SRMC meeting in Kuala Lumpur, where an action plan was agreed, as well as a change in the SRMC structure with the creation of task forces. And I think we will go through the task force in the next slide. And okay, so if we can move on to the next slide, please. So the task forces that I mentioned, that was formed pursuant to the meeting in Kuala Lumpur. Sorry, are the slides up? I cannot see them on my computer.
The slides aren't up yet. I think Jan's just working on that right now. Okay.
So we started off with 4 task forces because we had four basic objectives, and the objectives were to create quality for the WLA-SCS, to have inclusiveness, to improve efficiency, and to create awareness. And so, can I have slide number 2, please, Yana? Yeah, I'm done with this one. Second one, please. Yeah, okay. So can we enlarge that, please? Objective 1 was about quality. Okay, and this was to ensure that we created a truly internationally recognized standard, and with the aim to create opportunities, taking into consideration the availability of resources and technical differences by the various emerging lotteries. So first of all, the objective 1 of quality was to provide a high level of assurance on lottery security and integrity, with the direct involvement of stakeholders in the drafting process. And the result of objective 1 was actually the WLA-SCS 2020 itself. With regards to objective number 2, which is the inclusiveness, I already mentioned that it was to create a truly international recognized standard, to bring in emerging lotteries so that they would find the encouragement and the opportunity to work towards certification, and also to include the North American lotteries, especially those who are certified under Muzzle Rule 2. And the result of objective number 2 is Framework 2020. With regards to objective 3, which was about efficiency, the result of that is actually the guidelines certification, and which is to improve the efficiency and quality of the administration of the standard and the program. And this really was about working with the ASEs. The last but not least is objective 4, which is about awareness. And the awareness would be to bring to notice this WLA-SCS 2020 by way of webinars and cooperation tools, especially in the form of the COP. And I think, which is a code of practice, okay? So, so today we're going to pass this, we're going to have Anton and David speaking about each of the 4 objectives, and also to walk through with you in more detail the standards themselves. So I hope you enjoy this. This has certainly been something which is that the WLA-SRMC is very proud of. They recommend this very highly to you all for adoption, and we are certain that you will find this to be helpful and useful, and that especially the code of practice, which we always say is a living document, that we will welcome feedback from you all, so that there is better understanding and cooperation in moving and building the next standard, or improving this one. So with that, I'll pass you now to Anton. Thank you, Anton.
Thank you very much, Dato. So welcome everyone. We're definitely very excited to present the 2020 version of the WLA-SCS standard. We've been working on this for some time now. So to take a look at the table of contents, what we'll go over today. We'll look at the evolution of the standard from the 2000 version all the way up to today, the 2020 version. I'll go through the main changes of the WLA-SCS 2020 standard. We'll take a look at the new framework that has been introduced for certification. Take a quick look at the WLA-SCS guide to certification, the transition rules, and after that, my colleague David will go into more details in the different set of controls, changes to the G controls, changes to the L controls, the lottery operator controls, as well as the new set of controls, the S controls, the lottery technology supplier controls, as well as the M controls, the multi-jurisdictional game controls. And finally, a short note on the WLA-SCS 2020 Code of Practice. So as Dato mentioned in his introduction, we have come a long way. With the launch of the WLA-SCS 2020 version, we are very proudly celebrating the 20 years of the standard. The Security and Risk Management Committee was convened upon the establishment of the WLA in 1999, which was founded through the merger of Intertoto and AILE. One of our most important area of responsibility is the security control standard, the lotteries industry only internationally recognized security standard. The initial 2000 version of the WLA-SCS was based on the Intertoto security standard, which was the first internationally accepted standard for operational security of lotteries. The security control standard has continued to evolve since its first version, thanks to the volunteer work of the Security Risk Management Committee members, continuous effort to define controls that capture the security needs that evolve with the lottery business around the world and the ever-changing threat landscape. The 2003 version integrated specific controls on instant tickets, draws, retail security, and unclaimed prize money. After that, the 2006 version took a large step forward with the inclusion of compliance with ISO 27001 as a prerequisite to the WLA-SCS certification, covering general information security and the inclusion of internet games. In the 2012 version, 16 controls were added for sports betting. The latest 2016 version, controls for sports betting were expanded and the notion of integrity of operations appears. Finally, today it is with great pride that we present and we launch the 2020 version of the Security Control Standard. In this 2020 version, work has been done to combine similar controls from different sections and standardize the level of the controls across all sections and annexes. We thrived on the principle that the controls of the standard shall be objective and risk-based, rather than prescriptive and limiting. The general controls have been augmented from 23 to 24 controls, while the lottery-specific controls have been summarized from 114 all the way down to 64 controls, without reducing the security that results from these controls. This allowed us to expand more areas in the standard while not overwhelming organizations seeking to comply to the standard with too numerous prescriptive controls. We have thus been able to add two sets of controls in two different annexes. The S controls that apply to lottery technology suppliers, as well as the M controls that apply to multi-jurisdictional games, with a first section in this 2020 version that applies to lotteries that participate in games run by the Multi-State Lottery Association, also known as MUSL. This last part allows MUSL members to comply to certain parts of Rule 2 by being WLA-SCS certified, thus contributing to the objective of more inclusiveness, as Dato mentioned, to promote the WLA-SCS standard as a truly international recognized standard. On this note, I would like to gratefully thank Robert Nitz, Director of Information Security at the Multi-State Lottery Association, and his team for their great contribution to our 2020 standard. We have also greatly evolved the certification framework in this 2020 version. The WLA-SCS certification now has two levels. Level 1 is a first step towards full certification and is intended for lotteries that choose a more discrete step-by-step approach. Again, this is attached to our objective of allowing for more inclusiveness with an attention to emerging markets. This level is also intended for lotteries that participate in MUSL and that are looking to transition to the WLA-SCS Level 2 certification. Basically, WLA-SCS Level 1 requires compliance to all controls of the WLA-SCS without any compromise. All controls that are applicable to the organization's business, while excluding the requirement to be ISO 27001 certified. So this is a first step with the final aim to being WLA-SCS Level 2 certified. Level 2 requires both compliance to all of the SCS general and lottery specific security controls, as well as ISO 27001 certification. And this level is equivalent to the WLA-SCS certification as we know it up to today. So the new framework in itself does not introduce any changes in the approach for the lotteries that are already certified WLA-SCS 2016 today. The introduction of the two levels of certification allow us to reach out to more lotteries around the world and aligns with our strategy to make WLA-SCS a truly international recognized standard. On an administrative note, we would like to mention that all new certificates will now have a unique serial number added to it, as well as the expiry date has been removed from the logo of the certificate. Now, about the WLA-SCS 2020 guidelines to certification. WLA-SCS 2020 changes come together with an update of the procedures, requirements, and forms contained in the Guide to Certification. Very basically, we have simplified the process for auditors while strengthening the relationship between WLA and the assessment service entities to assure a high quality of audit services. Part A of the guide remains largely unchanged. Basically, we have restructured the order of the content and added information on the 2 levels of WLA-SCS certification, as well as some clarifications in the case of multiple site assessments. There is also a new paragraph dedicated to the certification process for muscle lotteries. Major changes has been introduced to the Part B, which has already been published since March 2020. The aim of the changes was to simplify the procedures while maintaining a control of the quality of services offered. In particular, the affiliation of assessment service entities, or ASEs, and their auditors has been simplified by requiring that the ASE be an accredited entity in accordance with ISO 17021. For other ASEs that are independent contractors, the procedures remain unchanged. ASEs are now responsible to provide an annual report that confirms the compliance of the ASE with the agreement and requirements, as well as a list of the employed auditors involved in the WLA-SCS audits. Since Part B has been introduced in March 2020, out of 32 assessment service entities, 19 have already renewed the affiliation and 5 are in the process of doing so. Finally, let us take a quick note on the transition rules, which remain very similar to the transition rules that have been defined for previous updates to the standard. So organizations that seek a new certification are allowed to choose between the 2016 and the 2020 version for the next 6 months. Starting from May 1st, 2021, only the WLA-SCS 2020 version will be accepted. For organizations that are already certified members, they have 2 years to transition from the 2016 version to the 2020 version. Thus, they can choose to remain with the 2016 version up to October 2022, or change to the 2020 version at any time within the next 2 years. Now, I would like to pass on the microphone to my dear colleague, David Boda, who will go into some details on the changes to the different set of controls.
Thank you, Anton, and hello, everyone. So with regards to the controls, we'll first start with the G controls, the general controls, and these are applicable to any organization. As we've already discussed, there's been a slight rise in the number of controls from 23 to 24, and I'm going to talk you through some of the key changes now. So the first change is a clarification, and in G113, we talk about the reporting line of the security function. And previously we talked about it not residing within technology, but recognizing that didn't work for many lotteries, we've changed that to say that it can actually reside in technology, but it has to be independent of technology with regards to the management of security risk, and that helps avoid any conflict of interest. And hopefully that clarification will make it clearer for lotteries and auditors about the expectations around that particular control. Another big suite of changes is in G2, and these controls all are around HR and personnel matters. Some of the control wording hasn't changed at all from the previous 2016 version, but what has changed is we've added a number of definitions into the standard, and one of them is around the definition of personnel and what that includes. And in the 2020 version of the standard, with regards to personnel, we've said it's not just employees on the payroll, but others who work in or for the lottery that have an opportunity to make an impact on the confidentiality, integrity, or availability of systems. When you're looking at transitioning to the new version, just have a look at those definitions. There's another key definition on gaming system and what's meant by that as well, also. But within G2, there's some changes to controls. We've promoted the control on corporate wagering policy from only being applicable to sports betting to be actually applicable to any lottery game and operation. And so there's now a control requirement to ensure that there's a policy to say whether employees or contractors or consultants are allowed to play the various lottery games or not, as the case may be. So that's a key change. There's a control within G2 around segregation of duties. Again, has been promoted from separate controls both within sports betting and also electronic draws in the previous version of the standard to be a general control where lotteries are asked to analyse what the segregation of duties requirements are in their lottery and make sure that those requirements, whatever they determine them to be, are enforced. There's a new control which I blogged about on the WLA blog a few weeks ago around personnel security. And this control comes in two parts. So firstly, there's a requirement around vetting, or some organisations might call it pre-employment screening or something similar. And this is around making sure that you've done checks so you know the identity of people and you know and choosing who you place your trust in within certain roles. And then there's a second part to the requirement around monitoring, which is to say that the vetting or screening processes are generally only a point in time activity. So some organisations might do them prior to employment, and some might also do some sort of aftercare through employment. But there's a need to manage the risk for some individuals through life, and that's where systems monitoring comes in. And with that in mind, there's some notes on that too. In this control, we're very conscious around the obligations in most jurisdictions around the world from the human rights legislation and similar around privacy. So there's some guidance that will be coming in the code of practice around balancing the security and privacy requirements with regards to the application of that control. And there's also a consolidated control in G2 around staff protection. Previously, we talked about making sure staff had sensible protection from terrorism or violent situations, and we've consolidated that control to talk about making sure that actually, regardless of the situation staff find themselves in, but specifically for public-facing staff or staff working in isolation as lone workers, that there's been adequate thought given to their personnel and physical safety. So that's G2. On G4, we've refocused the three controls that were around remote access to gaming systems, and actually just said, regardless of how you access them, it's about access to the gaming systems themselves and making sure that you know how that's possible, who's got it, and that you're logging it, and you understand what that access looks like. So that's the change to G4. In G5, there's quite a major change to the standard, and this relates to the evolution of lotteries who are starting to use the cloud more and more. So in G5.3, we talk about cloud security. Now, whether that's a software as a service model all the way through to the lottery running its own infrastructure as a service, or whichever variant of cloud, public or private, that lotteries are using, there's a requirement here to look at the standard ISO 27017 and be compliant with that standard, not to certify to the standard, but to be compliant with that standard for gaming systems. And again, there's a definition of gaming systems at the top of the standard. And finally, in section G, we've refocused the controls in G6 to look at the slightly more narrow definition around availability that we had previously, and be clear around making sure there's an understanding of availability requirements and resilience requirements, and then systems are designed and processes are designed against the requirements that have been set. And secondly, that there's thought given to business continuity planning, and that there's exercising of those plans, whether that's a tabletop exercise or more technical exercise to ensure they're effective. So those are the changes to section G. I'll now move on to the L controls, and here again there's a mixture of consolidated controls and new controls. So in section L, we've consolidated quite a few controls, and starting with L1, which is around the physical instant tickets or scratch cards. Here we've consolidated the controls relevant to operators, but we've also moved the controls relating to the printing and production of the tickets into section S, which relates to the lottery supply chain. In L2, which relates to the draw, we've actually left this largely unchanged. The controls will be as you've seen them previously. There's one new control around broadcasting or streaming lottery draws live to make sure that the adequate thought is given to maintaining public confidence. So regardless of the reality around the integrity of the draws, we don't want players or the public to have the perception there's an integrity issue with the draws by virtue of a mistake in the way the draw is broadcast or streamed, if there's any sort of delays or jumping of the footage. In L3, we've consolidated again the retailer controls, but the substantive meaning of those controls remains unchanged. And that's also true for L4 around prize validation and prize payment. Again, you'll see the controls have been consolidated, but the substantive meaning and requirements remain unchanged. In the L5 controls around digital gaming systems, there's been some minor modifications there. There's a requirement that existed previously around the intrusion testing of lotteries, the kind of the technical security testing of the systems, where previously it said it had to be on a regular basis, and we've just clarified that to say that has to be a minimum of an annual basis in L517. We've also added a control here around responsible disclosure, which is again something you can see on a WLA blog post that I did in a week or two ago. And this is a requirement to publish to the public and ways to get in touch with the lottery securely if they found a security vulnerability or security risk within the lottery, so they have a way of informing the lottery of what that might be, so it can be assessed and if necessary remediated. In L6, there's controls around sports betting, and L7, and that's largely unchanged in terms of meaning, but consolidated. And L7 around video lottery terminals was an addition of a single control around the architecture of the VLTs, but the other controls remain unchanged. And that's the changes for lottery operators. So these section L controls for lottery operators are again mandatory if they're applicable to the lottery. So, for example, if the lottery doesn't provide sports betting, then those controls are obviously not applicable in that case. Moving on to Annex C, which is the S controls. So this is a new annex we've added, which didn't exist previously. And the idea is to help manage the risk around the supply chain for lottery technologies. And here focused again on gaming systems. So that definition section at the top of the standard is quite important. We've tried to, in forming those definitions, take the ways of working and differences across the lottery world into account. There might be some fringe cases, and obviously where those fringe cases arise, it will be important to make a judgment between the auditor and the audited entity as to the right scope, and obviously you can reach out to the security email address at World Lotteries if there's a clarification required. But in section S, the controls break down into 3 sections. There are 21 in total, and the first 2 sections are new. And the final section is around the printing of physical tickets that I referred to earlier that has been moved. So the first section in section S is around application security. So this is ensuring that the code that's written for gaming systems and lottery products is done in a secure way, with good security practices in mind, whoever's doing that development work. So there's controls around making sure there's a policy on application security, that there's application security checks around static and dynamic code analysis and adequate security testing that takes place long before that code ever enters the production environments. There's also a training and awareness requirement about how to write secure code. And then in the second section, there's requirements around hardware and software or firmware of lottery technologies. There's requirements around making sure that the release process into production has got adequate integrity built into it, so that the code that was, or the hardware that was developed is the same that was tested, it's the same that ends up in the production environment. There's requirements around ensuring adequate security logging, and also that where there's a difference in organization between the supplier or vendor of that technology and the person that's operating it. Obviously in some lotteries that's the same, but where's the difference, there's a very clear understanding about what those logs mean. So the person responsible for monitoring them understands what the different how to interpret the different logs and can distinguish between suspicious and legitimate activity. And then there's requirements around integrity, whether that's file integrity, hardware integrity. There's requirements around vulnerability and patch management, and a repeat of the control around responsible disclosure. But this time, that if you're a lottery organization that supplies technology, gaming systems and technologies, there's a mechanism for lottery operators to inform of any vulnerabilities or risks that have been found, and that's then the conclusion of section S. And then the final annex is around multi-jurisdictional games from section M, and this is, as we spoke about before, at the moment only related to the games of muzzle, so such the Powerball game, for example. And here we've worked with Robert Nitz and his team in muzzle to identify the specific controls that are important to the muzzle games that aren't covered elsewhere in the standard, such that a lottery that operates a muzzle game can evidence these controls to the WLA auditor, and pass that certificate back to Robert and his team, instead of working through the muzzle rule 2. And there's 11 additional controls that are identified in that section. And that's the conclusion of our talk around the controls. I hope that summary was useful. I'll now talk a little bit about the code of practice that we referenced, and this is slightly different to what we've done in previous versions of the standard. The term code of practice, I'm sure, will be familiar with to many of you who have worked with ISO 27001. There's obviously an ISO 27002 that does something similar to what we're trying to achieve here, and we've modelled it on a similar basis. And here, the code of practice that we're still developing is intended to give that interpretation of how to implement the controls or how to audit the controls from an SRMC point of view, and we've intended it as a living document, because obviously within the many jurisdictions around the world and the many lotteries, there'll be many fringe cases that maybe we're not aware of, and so that as those come to light and lottery operators and auditors make us aware of them, we can add in that guidance so others can benefit from it as well, especially where the interpretation might fall into the grey area. We can clarify that for going forward. And so and because we've decided to do it as a living document, we've decided to base it on a wiki, which we'll keep up to date as things happen, and will be made available to members and auditors, so they can both contribute their own thoughts and questions, and the SRMC can clarify their own thinking with regards to the interpretation of controls. So that's the code of practice. And with that, I'll pass back to Valeria to help us take any questions. Thank you.
Thanks, Dr. Lawrence, Anton, and David for this presentation. I have collected a few questions. I want to start with a very, very important question because it touches a crucial point of these updates. This is for Anton, but David, of course, if you want to add something, please go ahead. So, Anton, knowing that security cannot have compromising levels, would you please expand more on the differences between the two levels and how we guarantee that we do not bargain the security with the new standard?
Yes, thank you, Valeria. So, yeah, the difference between level 1 and level 2. Level 1 requires compliance to all of the controls of the WLA-SCS standard without any compromise. So all of the controls, as David mentioned, that are applicable to the business must be complied with to achieve level 1. So it's not a subset or any sort of. The only difference is that we took out the ISMS, the Information Security Management System requirement, from the requirement to be certified for level 1. And this was intended to introduce new organizations that are looking to comply with the full standard in a step-by-step way, and who wish to comply with very strong security controls related to lottery, but might not have the whole information security management system living in their organization. So effectively, there is no compromise on the set of controls of the WLA-SCS. The main difference is the certification to ISO 27001. For existing organizations, it's very similar to what they have today, with compliance needing to be maintained to the WLA-SCS and having ISO 27001 certification. So I hope that clarifies a little bit.
Thanks, Anton. Okay, another question this is for David, is about the controls. In the 2020 version, many controls seems to have disappeared. I'm referring in particular to the sports betting, where we passed from 21 controls to 5, or to the instant tickets, where the L controls were reduced from 32 to 5. Have these controls really disappeared, or they found a different place in the standard?
Thank you. That's a great question. So no controls disappeared. We've consolidated many controls because in previous versions of the standard we split things out quite a bit, and all of the key components of those split out controls have been summarized into single controls where we thought that would be helpful and add value to simplify the standard. So you met, the person asking the question mentioned the example of sports betting. So for example, in L611 around betting framework, we've consolidated four controls from L7 in the 2016 standard. Each of those 4 controls are still applicable, but we've consolidated the wording.
Thank you, David. Let me check if there is some other question we didn't reply yet. There is a question, this is not specifically about the recent updates we are presenting, What is the current status of the ISO EWA? Do you plan further activities for this document? Any of you who wants to say something?
So that's also a good question. So for those that aren't aware, previously, six or so years ago, the WLA and ISO worked together to look at making the WLA-SCS an ISO standard in its own right, and the first step towards that was to create something called an IWA. And I think that stands for an International Working Agreement. I could be wrong on that. Where ISO reviewed the WLA standard and made sure it met all the requirements of an ISO standard, of which there are many. And with this change, there was a need to revisit that process, but we found that the ISO timescales for change and the process that has to be gone through to meet all the requirements of ISO was a different set of timescales than the WLA standard was trying to evolve to, and so there was a disparity between what the IWA was saying in terms of controls even before we started this 2020 update, and what the WLA standard was saying. And so for that reason, we decided to pause that partnership and focus on making sure that the WLA standard was the best and the most up-to-date it could be.
We have some other questions. This is about the M controls. Thomas is asking, Annex D controls for multi-jurisdictional games is geared towards the US lotteries subject to muzzle. Are there any extensions planned for other jurisdictions engaged in multi-jurisdictional games, for example, Euromillions?
Right, so we started with an introduction. We introduced the M controls in this 2020 version. We focused on muscle with the work we did with Robert Nitz, but the intention is to have this annex be useful to other multi-jurisdictional games. So Euromillion, here in Canada where I am, we also have the interprovincial lotteries. The intention is to have different sections cover these multi-jurisdictional gaming's controls in the future years.
Yes, Anton, there is a question from Helena. Have there been any changes to the standard for random number generation? David, maybe you want to get this question? David?
Sorry, I was on mute. That's a great question, Helena. And I know we've spoken about this previously. So under the section on the electronic draws, there are some modifications to strengthen that requirement, but there's also changes elsewhere in the standard that relate to RNGs and what they're used for. So such as I touched on the segregation of duties control, which has been promoted to a G control and would be applicable to a random number, you know, the development and operation of an RNG and then how that passes through, you know, a win matrix or whatever the onward transmission for the logic of that particular game happens to be. So the changes aren't all necessarily within one control; they are spread throughout the standard in that regard.
There are a lot of questions here. Dennis is asking, is WLA certifications still limited to WLA members? With level 1 certification, can this be offered to non-WLA members? So I think I can easily reply to this question, and no, this is not changed. WLA-SCS certification is only for WLA members. Vincent is asking, what is the impact of the changes on the duration of the certification and surveillance audits? Do you still have recommendation concerning the audit duration? Some of you want to take this question?
It does remain a 3-year certification with the same procedure for yearly reviewing. There has been no changes on that effect in our framework in the 2020 version. The only specification in the guideline is for multi-site auditing. So we've specified when an audit is, when an organization, when a lottery has multiple physical sites, the auditor must specify on which site the audit has been done. And if a certain aspect has not been audited in one particular site, to document the justification of why that has been done to assure the quality of the audit.
This is, I think, for David. ISO 27017 distinguishes between cloud provider and cloud user. Which compliance is needed? This is from Alexander.
Alexander, that's a great question. It depends on what the lottery is trying to do. So some lotteries might be providing, B2B or B2C lottery services hosted in the cloud, and some lotteries might be consuming cloud services provided but by others. So I'm aware of lotteries operating around the world that have both models. So it's very much choosing.
Great. Peter is asking, can we at some point see that definition of gaming system, please? Peter, I reply.
Standard that applies to the situation.
Sorry, David. Please go ahead.
Sorry, you froze there for a moment. Okay, good. So I think the question was on 27017 and providers and such like. So it relates to what the lottery service is actually being provided. So some lotteries offer B2B or B2C lottery services externally and would be a provider. Some are consuming cloud-hosted services and would be a consumer. So in looking through 27017, it's about choosing the right controls based on the service being provided or consumed. There's lottery organisations around the world I'm aware of that are operating in both models at the moment.
Okay, Vincent is adding something to his previous question. Okay, not the duration of the certificate, but for the audit itself. I can take this question, Vincent, this and everybody. As for the previous edition of the security program, there are indications on the duration of audits. You will find this in the Annex A of the new guide to certification. Is exactly the same information that was before in the guide. And in any case, it's just an indication, and so it's not a mandatory information. Let me see other questions. It's not easy to read because it's very small, so sorry. How will compliance to WLA affect upcoming Maslow Rule 2 audits scheduled for 2021? We will be certifying against WLA this month and have a Maslow Rule 2 audit in January, for example. Someone want to take the question? Is this clear? Or?
Yeah, I can start off. Oh yeah, go ahead, David.
Sorry. So this is a conversation that would need to be had between the lottery and Robert, but the starting point would be you'll need to be certified against the 2020 version of the standard before being able to use that as an alternative to a Rule 2 audit. In the timescales you've spoken about, my assumption would be you're looking to certify or recertify against the 2016 version. So you'll probably still need a Rule 2 audit next year as well, I would have thought. But the decision is for Robert Nitz and his team to make that determination.
So yeah, to add to that, for lotteries that are part of Muscle, part of the Muscle rules are mapped to the WLA-SCS standard. So when you are certified Rule 2, you can automatically apply for WLA-SCS Level 1 for the next coming year. And the idea is to progress afterwards. So lotteries in the US that wish to comply with WLA-SCS can do so and have this recognized for the majority of the parts of Rule 2. Basically, we exclude the administrative controls that are very specific to Rule 2 that are not security based.
Thanks, Anton. Next question. Our recertification is planned for December 2020. Can we be certified with new version or get an extension of the certificate to be prepared for new version of standard? I can take this question. Sure, you can already use the 2020 standard from this moment on. It is already available. If you want to keep using the 2016 version, there is a 2 years transition period. So for the upcoming certification in December, you can choose the 2016 or 2020. And for the extension, there is no extension foreseen, extension of the validity of the certificate. There is no extension foreseen to allow the transition from 2016 to 2020. I think that we replied to all the questions. If something remained unreplied, please write us or contact us using the email security@worldlotteries.org that you see on the screen. There are a lot of questions concerning the documents. Meanwhile, I check if there is some new questions, but okay, no. So all the documents about the WLA-SCS 2020 are up on the WLA website under the security section. We decided to publish there all the documents related to the program. So you will find the text of the standard, you will find the guide to certification, which is the document containing procedures and requirements for developing assessments and for assessment entities and auditors to become affiliated with the WLA. You will find also the new forms that we have created for the 2020 version, the declaration of assessment form, the assessment form, and also the request for automatic certification. This is just for lotteries certified to Muscle Rule 2 and will be available for 2 years from now. Also, this presentation will be available on WLA website. So for who is asking this, there are many people asking this. So the presentation will be again on the WLA website and will be available for everybody, again under the security section. Some participants asked about when we inform the WLA member about this update, and I can reply that all WLA members are already informed. And in any case, we are constantly in contact with them, and but they are all informed already. I think that I replied to all the administrative technical question. Let me check. Okay, no, this is last check. Okay, perfect. At the moment, there are no more other questions. Okay, perfect. Oh, something pop up. Are you going to publish a detailed changes document like you did for 2016 compared to 2012 version? Yes, Miguel, is everything already on the WLA website. You will find an Excel document with all the new controls of the 2020 version compared with the 2016 version with the changes highlighted and all the information. And in any case, we are always available for any doubt you might have. Perfect. So I want, unless there is something else you want to add, Anton, David, or Dato Lawrence.
Yes, I will like to add something else. Well, you know, today's the launch of WLA-SCS 2020, and so we're very excited, as I said, about this new standard. But we must take cognizance of the pandemic we've just gone through, and I think heads up would be that I think going forward we will look at risk generally for the business, for the lottery business, instead of rather than just the securities control alone. So I think there was a survey that was done, and I think that's useful for you all to read that and see what the lessons learned from the various lotteries around the world have been in terms of the pandemic and the lockdown. And I think there are important lessons there to be learned. And as I said, you know, going forward, I think there will be a greater emphasis on enterprise risk, and I think that's an area that I think we will, as part of the SRMC, spend a bit more time looking at it going forward. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Lawrence. I want to add just one last point. I want to thank everybody who was involved in this update of the standard, starting from the SRMC members to all the stakeholders that have been involved, some assessment entities, the auditors, which gave us very important and useful feedback to fine-tune the update. I want to thank also the WLA contributors, Intralot and Pollard, who provided very useful feedback too. And I want to thank the speakers for this presentation. It has been very useful. We already got some feedback that the information has been well received and complete. Again, I want to take this chance to thank again all the members of the SRMC, the Security and Risk Management Committee, for the work that they have done and will be doing for the continuous improvement of the lottery security program. From a global perspective, the WLA-SCS 2020, together with the new framework of certification, represent a turning point for the sector. We, as a WLA office, are ready to welcome new lotteries in the certification process and to assist all WLA members and all the auditors as well in this journey. So contact us for any information you might need, or for any doubt you have, or for any comment you have on the program. I want to inform also that one of the missions of the WLA is to be more in contact with assessment entities and auditors to explain better the controls and to be sure that the application of controls is well understood. This is why we are working on organizing some technical webinars, which will take place on different parts of the world. With this, I mean taking into consideration the time differences. These webinars will be useful to understand better the controls and the application, and to establish an open discussion line with SRMC members and with the WLA office to clarify any doubts that auditors and WLA members might have on the application of the controls. More information on this will follow. A special thanks to the colleagues from European Lotteries for their cooperation in organizing this amazing week of security webinars. I think that I have done with the thanks messages. I remind you that tomorrow there is the last webinar of this series. We will talk about operational risks, and as Dolores was anticipating before, we will be presenting the WLA-SRMC report on enterprise risk management, and EL will present also the card on operational risks. So don't miss this day. It will be very interesting. So thanks again for your attention, and the official launch of the WLA-SCS 2020 is concluded.
Thank you, Valeria, and thank you, everyone.
Okay, thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Cheers.